Alright, so we've actually got a video suggestion here. I apologize for probably butchering your username by Yukito Shimazaki620. And I just wanted to say really quick, thank you. It's really cool to have anyone watching and engaging with the content, and I am very appreciative of that. So the concept we're going with here is Melee with less dev time, about a 16 character roster. Another shout out and credit here to David Kimball for this, and honestly a lot of other really great Smash related videos. I believe he was also involved in some Magic projects at some point. Don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. But yeah, in this scenario, what would have my biased picks have been? So I think the first place to look is at my biased Smash 64 roster. These were some of my top picks. One thing that I would change that David Kimball also changed was no Echo fighters. We gotta prioritize unique fighters. So no Luigi and no Gooey. To dive into some more specifics though, the way I do a lot of these rosters is that I just sort of look at some of my favorite games, especially if they were coming out around this time, and pull characters from those games. And especially earlier on, picking, that first batch of series that, for the most part, have multiple entries that I really enjoy. And with that criteria being said, that makes Mario, Captain Falcon, and Fox shoe-ins for me. I enjoy both of the F-Zero and Star Fox games that are out at this point. They're recent. And Mario, I mean, there's so many Mario games. There's something for about everyone there. Link and Kirby are solidly in around the time of Melee, too. They're almost in the opposite situations. I've said before, but I'm not a big fan of the isometric top-down old Zelda games, but I really like Ocarina of Time. Majora's Mask was okay, too. I never finished it, but I definitely sort of like what they were going for with it. And then Kirby, the latest game at the time, 64, was okay. I like some of the ideas and directions they took with it, but overall it wasn't really my favorite 2D platformer. But I do really like some of the Dreamland games. I don't know, at this point for me, they both seem like a bit of a mixed batch, with one sort of being more successful for me earlier and one more recent. But overall, they still fit the criteria I had there. Just thought it was still something worth pointing out. To address some of the other characters, though, we got Donkey Kong, who is also pretty safe. I'll admit, I never really got into the Country trilogy, but the arcade games are all right. And recently, we had Donkey Kong 64 and Diddy Kong Racing, which I both really enjoyed. The only weird part about Donkey Kong is that he's, kind of a Mario character. So if you wanted to go with one character per series, I mean, I think most people could argue the Donkey Kong series itself has, earns its spot as a unique series. But it is something still worth pointing out. But overall, with a 16 character roster, I think we can definitely double dip with some of the bigger franchises, so that really isn't a concern here. Where we start to get a little weird is with the remaining 4 characters. So something I noticed in David Kimball's video was that intelligent systems didn't get involved in Melee till later, seemingly. So it almost makes you wonder, I mean, what do we know? But a lot of people speculate on how easy certain companies, even internal companies Nintendo owns outright or, a part of, are to work with based on, the costumes that are in Smash or just the other content that's added. So it almost makes me wonder, with such a tight timeline, if we should only be going with one of these sort of more external companies. And right now we got Game Freak with Pokemon, we got Rare with Banjo Kazooie, and we got Intelligent Systems with Fire Emblem. I mean, I feel like you can make arguments against each of them. If I can only pick one, and it is my personal bias, I would probably pick Banjo. But I think it is still feasible to see all three in. Like, I don't know, I feel like roster would be priority one with the game. So even if we have to allocate, resources away from other stuff to have to deal with some more of the external companies, I think it would be worth it. But once again, what do we know? Maybe these companies are even easier to work with. But as for the arguments I would make against with Pokemon, because Pokemon technically doesn't meet the criteria I set forth. One of the main reasons I gave it sort of an exception is because the series is so big, but when you look at sort of my perspective on it, I'm not a big fan of mainline, and the only game that's out now that I thought was pretty good was Pokemon Snap. So it's like, are you really going to be willing to put forth a lot of extra resources if you had to for a series? Your biases including because of one spin-off game and not even the mainline stuff. I don't know, but overall Pokemon is still just, it impacted culture so much. I mean, it's a tough call if it comes to that, but like I said, I think it's reasonable for it to not come to that. And then with Marth and Banjo Kazooie, it's once again, are you going to put forth those extra resources to put in a series whose future with Nintendo is in question, like it is with Rare and Banjo, or a company whose major independent works haven't left Japan? It's a weird situation, but overall, I would keep them all in if you could. That's a good segue for Ayumi and Game & Watch. So I still like the idea, even with the tighter resources, of throwing in at least one out of left field, unexpected, probably at this point retro fighter that pretty much no one saw coming. And I feel like both Ayumi and Game & Watch fit that. But it's like, who do you pick? I will sort of dive into this really soon, but one thing I don't know about Game & Watch is, once again, if you're tight on resources, if his whole 2D aesthetic is, it's just a gimmick that would need all these extra resources that, you could use to, working with these other companies and whatnot. I don't know, when I first added one in 64 and one in Melee, it was sort of more, I knew that the GameCube can handle Game & Watch. I don't know about the N64, and I knew Game & Watch Gallery 4, I think, came out around Melee. Not realizing that there was other Game & Watch Gallery games coming out around 64. So between those two, I think it's honestly just a crapshoot, just sort of down to your interpretation of what would be easier to implement. My gut right now is saying Ayumi, but you can probably ask me that, in a couple of days, and maybe I'll be leaning towards Game & Watch, but we'll say Ayumi for now. I mentioned character gimmicks, and I feel like that could also be a concern with some of my Melee editions. In Melee, I particularly added Goron and Zoralink as sort of a replacement to Zelda Sheik. But once again, that might be more effort than it's worth, and if I'm not going that route with it, I would probably just go with Zelda. I know David Kimball's video did keep both Zelda and Sheik in that gimmick to get rid of the next one we're going to talk about, but once again, my gut right now, with just sort of the resources we have, and even just how much smaller the roster is, like, I think Zelda could definitely have two fighters, but three, when you only have, 16, having it take up almost a quarter of the roster, I don't know about that. That doesn't sit as well either, so my gut for this is telling me Zelda. Here is a reminder of what our full Melee roster was. And I thought I would throw in right now, the other gimmick I was sort of alluding to was Slippy and Rob64, who had the Ice Climbers gimmick, which once again, at this point, that's probably more trouble than it's worth. Especially if we didn't, pull the trigger with some of our other gimmicks. So, what's kind of unfortunate though is I would really like to include another Star Fox and F-Zero rep. But at this stage, I probably wouldn't. And that mainly just comes down to where the series are at this point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but with F-Zero X, I don't think there was any cutscenes or anything. I mean, yeah, you can add Samurai Goro if you wanted a unique character from the series, but you don't really have anything to really work with as opposed to F-Zero GX, where you had some, cutscenes where their personalities and abilities were fleshed out more. Up until that point, it was pretty much vehicle focused, and there was an anime that came out too. I don't know if it would have been out. I think it was later. It was after Melee. But I feel like you can maybe pull some stuff from there if you really wanted to. And Star Fox is just a very similar situation. We haven't seen them outside their vehicles like we did in Adventures or Assault. And yeah, an Echo Fighter would make sense for both, but since we're focused on unique characters, I just don't see it working at this point. If you're keeping track, that's 11 fighters, so we got 5 to go. You saw Bowser there. I would keep him. This would be it for Mario, though, with 2, kinda 3 reps. I feel like if any series, Mario can get away with, the kind of 3 reps. I also just kind of like the balance, like between Mario and Zelda. I imagine, Peach and Bowser and Zelda and Ganon/Ganondorf are probably popular requests all around, so kind of going with the villain on one end and the princess on the other, I think works good. Obviously, I think Yoshi and Wario would probably be pretty popular picks, though, too. But plus, once again, going by my bias, I think Bowser's pretty cool. He would be my next choice overall, and I think Zelda makes more sense given how new Ganondorf is, given sort of, maybe questioning whether Ganon would work. And I guess if you had to pick between, the 2 princesses, Peach or Zelda, I'd probably go with Zelda. I think she's a cooler character. Sorry, Peach. So we actually didn't add any newcomers to Kirby in my biased Melee, but that's because we carried over Gooey from 64. And if you're not doing that and need a unique fighter, then I would say that, yeah, you're in a good spot to add Dedede or Meta Knight. And as I've said in the past, it's just a toss-up between the 2. I think Dedede might fit in Smash better, but I like Meta Knight more. But I guess, once again, if we're talking about resources and that, trying to be efficient, I don't know if it's true or not, but I thought I heard stuff in the past about wings that you would need for Meta Knight being kind of a little difficult to work with, especially on some older hardware, so that might set us over the edge for Dedede here. So I think one more rare character sounds good. Once again, we had more last time around, but once again, your roster ratio was a lot bigger. You had, 10 more characters. I think almost kind of what we did with Mario, having 3, Donkey Kong kind of being in between, and having Banjo and, as you can probably guess, Joanna Dark as the 2 reps would be a nice balance, I guess. So I cut, Gruntilda right out of contention right away, because I would obviously rather represent a different rare game as opposed to Banjo again. It's tough between Joanna or Orchid, but I mean, Perfect Dark has one game, but it is a spiritual successor to GoldenEye, which is a really important game, and I really enjoy both those games. So this is one of them. I'm willing to, give a little bit of an exception here. And as for Orchid, too, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like Killer Instinct, but she's also just kind of there, too, because I felt like it was another really noteworthy rare IP with multiple good games on, multiple consoles, including something released recently. And I really like 2D fighters, but overall, there's other 2D fighters I prefer more. And hell, even other rare IP like Blast Corps, for instance, that I would overall prefer more. So I guess, once again, I've said it a lot already, but I just don't have as much motivation, I guess, to add Orchid just yet in this scenario. So we got 2 characters left, and this is not what it looks like. So I don't know, there wasn't really another series I thought stood out to be added for me at this point. We've pretty much covered everything, so... And then the only 2 series I sort of still left on the table for more reps were Pokemon and Fire Emblem. And I decided reluctantly, slightly, I guess, to add a Pokemon rep. Once again, though, the main appeal for me is Pokemon Snap, so I'm going to be a little petty and make this as close to a Pokemon Snap rep as we could get away with, potentially. So overall, the character would be Pokemon Trainer, but this isn't, Smash switching between 3 different Pokemon. You literally play as the trainer on the battlefield. And you'll throw Pokeballs, do other stuff the trainer could, do in the games. I don't know what was introduced at this point and what wasn't, but I think there would be enough to work with, especially if you pull from Pokemon Snap and have some, camera-based attacks. You can, throw around some of the items that you would have in the game to attract different Pokemon. That would be the way I would go with it. Overall, I think the best scenario here would to actually not even have this Pokemon trainer be the central character. It would probably be to have the Gold and Silver trainer as, the physical fighter. That way you can, have something introduced from the first Pokemon generation with Pikachu and something from the second. And sort of, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, make another Pokemon Snap with Gold and Silver Pokemon in it. I'm pretty sure it was only the first generation in Pokemon Snap. I did do a little research because I wasn't sure, like I said, especially with limited resources, if you would be able to throw in both the male and female Pokemon trainer from that generation. I guess the female one actually didn't debut until Pokemon Crystal, which still would have been out in time, but I guess she was actually also the first female trainer. I guess the one from Gen 1 didn't come until the remakes or something. So I don't know, I would like to include both if possible, but if you only have one or the other, I mean, that's kind of tough. Because you have, more time with, the Gold and Silver trainer, but I sort of like the historical value of Crystal, I think was the name of the Pokemon Crystal female trainer. And I thought she had a cool design too. She has kind of like a lab coat and blue hair. But maybe that's a little too different from, what we're used to from the other trainers. I don't know why I didn't just pull it up, but these two, that's Crystal, that's Gold. And like you said, Gold, does have, some similar characteristics to Red. So it's a tough call if you have to pick. I would try for both, but if that's not possible and I had to pick one, I mean, it's my bias, so I would go with Crystal. So this one is a little out there. Not someone I even really considered with my other rosters, but hear me out. Once again, we want a unique fighter. And Silica could obviously be unique from Marth, being a mix of a sword fighter and a magic wielder, but I think I would focus on a dedicated magic wielder at this stage. I know we already have Zelda, but I think you can make 2 of them and have them both be unique. Hell, that's even the direction at one point I did go with the 3rd Fire Emblem rep before changing my mind from Micaiah to Black Knight. But I guess Julia would sort of fulfill what I was sort of doing with Micaiah, and we don't necessarily have a Black Knight-ish character that stands out to that degree for the series, I guess. In my opinion, I've only played a little of the Arcania games, but... And then Julia, too, she's a major character, important to the story. I think... Yeah, I just had to scroll down a little. She does appear in Thracia, too, so she's in, the 2 most recent games. And I think it would work. Honorable mention to Lilina. I did consider her, too, but obviously, with our time frame, I just don't think we can have Lilina sort of fit in that Roy spot that Melee actually had. So this is what the full biased Smash with less development time for Melee roster would look like. Red outline means unlockable, so Bowser, Zelda, Ayumi, Dedede, Poke Trainer, and Julia. I normally throw these in the beginning. Probably edit it in because I forgot to, but yeah, one more thing. Stages. David Kimball also talked about stages, and I'll touch on them really quick. I'm not going to dive into details, though, too much like I did in my original video, but David Kimball's video had 17 stages, and with you having 16 fighters, I would probably really, drive home the home stage concept with, there just being one bonus stage. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to my original GIMP project with the image, so I just had to pull it from the original video. But Mario's home stage would probably be Peach's Castle, Bowser Castle, Donkey Kong, Jungle Hijinks, Banjo, Gruntilda's Lair, Joanna Dark Central, Link would have Clock Town, Zelda would have Temple of Time, Ayumi would have Ayayusha Estate or whatever that was. Kirby's weird because especially if you're trying to drive home the point of, home stages, I think it would be weird for Kirby or Dedede to have Halberd as their main stage. So maybe you just bring in, I don't know, Dreamland or Fountain of Dreams as a Kirby stage, and then Castle Dedede as Dedede's stage. Or I would probably do Dreamland, I guess, especially if we aren't going to have a selectable battlefield like David Kimball's also didn't. Fox would have Sector Z. F-Zero's would probably change, actually, because I went with the Big Blue theme on the Mute City layout, but if we're not bringing back the classic Mute City, then I don't get why we wouldn't just have, Melee's iteration of Mute City, since we were using the layout anyway as Falcon's stage. Marth's stage would be Arcania's ship. Julia's, I think this was Elib Coliseum, but we would switch that to Jugdrill or Thracia Coliseum. Actually, maybe it was one of those to begin with. I don't remember specifically. I just checked it was Thracia, so yeah, that doesn't change. Just forget that, I guess. But that was a consideration when I was originally thinking about it. I would probably change the Pokemon stages too. I'd probably have Pikachu at Pokemon Stadium. And since we're not going to have council floats, and since I don't really feel like Pokemon Trainer, especially if we're trying to pay our respects to Snap, I don't think Saffron City would really fit, and I would rather bring back Stadium than do Saffron City. So I feel like the best fit for almost Pokemon Trainer and Snap might be to do Poke Floats, especially if we don't have our council floats. Our bonus stage would come from Nintendo Wars, Advance Wars, whatever you want to call it. This was something I seriously considered too, because if we weren't going to have a Fire Emblem Echo, why not pull from the sister series of intelligence systems? But then, I don't know, I just feel like Julia would be a better fit. I just don't imagine, especially with, GameCube limitations and limited resources, how you would really make an advanced Nintendo Wars rep stand out from, sort of similar concepts like you might see out of Fox or Joanna Dark. But since that didn't work out, we're definitely going to throw in a stage. If I did throw in a rep, it probably would have been Yuan Delta here for Red Star, later Orange Star. And overall, we did add a Orange Star stage eventually, so I would just bump that stage up a game. But, some of it would be a little different because it's, Red Star instead of Orange right now. But yeah, I hope you enjoy the hypothetical of a hypothetical. It is fun, though. I love, overanalyzing and coming up with different scenarios, especially with something like Smash, which, being a celebration of gaming, a lot of people would have different choices to celebrate their gaming histories, so it's fun to share.